upper and or lower characters. That's the one we're talking about, like 26 of them. In order for it to be anything safe, it has to be 12 to 13 characters, where it will take computer 12 years to generate all the different possibilities of 12 characters. And if we add then the mix-up between upper and lower, it gets a little bit safer. If we also include characters and numbers, it will even be safer. And if we also include the special characters, like the question mark, the hash sign, the exclamation mark, all these signs, they make it even much more difficult to break. But still, it'll be nice to go above 10. As you can see here with 10, we're safe. The computer can generate it in 920 years. Generate all possible combinations of 10 characters if we're using all numbers, characters, capital and small, and also include the special characters. So that becomes secure or safe. So also try to use in your password a capital and small characters, and also the numbers, and also include special characters. So, and there's an example. There were many researches done with huge data, so a collection of 10 million passwords. They looked at what are the most common passwords that people use. Now, looking at 10 million and of passwords that were either made available or released or failed. And these are the highest, the number one password in the world is this password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's one of the weakest words. It's probably the weakest word as to use as a password. Some people use the word password as a password. So some people just write ABC. So all these passwords are reasonably weak, very weak, not reasonably weak. So what are the practices that are done? Writing down your password. This is a practice that many people do. They get a password they can't remember, so I say I better write it down. And they put it maybe in the drawer on their desk. That's where people will look first. And they'd find you probably have some password written there somewhere. So never write down a password. Somehow try and, unless it's encrypted, or don't write it as it is. Or maybe write an opposite character, or duplicate every number, or do something. Or write it all, reverse the alphabet, but don't write it in its plain format. Sharing with other people, never share it. Never share your password with anyone. Because the moment you share it with one person, it's going to go, it's going to spread. No changing of a password. Most people do not change their password. And maybe a last question here. Can you put your hands up if you've changed your password in the last year for your email, for your whatever, Gmail that you're using? Anybody changed their password in the past 6 months or a year? Yeah, I see maybe 2% or 3%, 5% of us have changed. Well, let me assure you, if you are a person who has an important job or a sensitive job, I can assure you that there are those who have your password now and have access to your email. Change your password. And the worst thing, this is a kind of attack that you wouldn't even know. And it could go for years. People would be reading your email, having access to your email because you've never changed your password. Make a habit of it. If you're a student, get into it. Maybe a good thing from an academic point of view every semester, just change your password every semester. And once you get a habit into that, when you finish and you go become a professional person, you'll probably continue to do that habit. If you're already a professional person and if you're not changing your password, I advise you, do change it. Not just the email, but all your passwords. Right, so not changing a password is not a great thing to do. It's actually, it's a bad, as far as security is concerned. The attack is known as a passive attack. A passive attack, somebody that attacks your system but does not touch nothing, does not delete anything. They just watch, read the information, maybe get copies of it. But they have access to your, whatever system it is. They may have access to your bank account. They may have access to your documentation, whatever it is. So do change your password as a habit. And do not use the same password for all accounts. It's dangerous as well. So if you lose that password, maybe to your email, also your Facebook is gone, also your bank account's gone, everything. So make sure not to cover or use, just for your own comfort, use only one password to perform your, to live your life in the electronic world. The next thing is storing passwords. I just mentioned that. Don't store it in plain text format, whether you're an ordinary user or whether you are a programmer, and especially if you're a programmer. Make sure no passwords of any users in any organizations are stored in their plain text format. Just to solve that problem of storing passwords in plain text formats, most of them are hashed. There's a nice technique of hashing. Hashing is like encrypting. It takes the word and changes it and encrypts it and puts it onto stores it instead of storing the password. So what does hashing do? It's a hash function is a small function, extremely fast function, that takes any password or any length of any text and generates a fixed size text. So if your password is short, it will still produce, for example, maybe 25 characters or 40 characters. Even if your password is longer, it still produces 40 characters. So hashing, it's like encryption, but it has an advantage. If we encrypt this and from the input here, and goes through the hash, it generates an output, there is no way of bringing it back. It's not like encryption. An encryption system, it's a two-way function. If I give you a message, you can encrypt it. Encryption or ciphering, it makes the message secure. You cannot read it, cannot be read. But you can bring it back if it was encrypted. But with hashing, it cannot bring it back. Nobody can bring it back, or at least not in a reasonable time. So hashing is great. But you say, okay, if we change the password and store it, how does the user come back in? Well, when the user logs in, you take their password that they type, hash it, and compare the two hashes together. But at least the advantage, if you lose this file with the names and all the hashes, then it's not a big problem. It's still secure because the passwords are still hidden. And even to make it even more secure, they have another process called salting. That's like adding a salt to it. But what they do is they add few characters to your password. So when you submit a password to the system, they add few characters at the start or at the end. So when they hash it, they even make things even worse for somebody who tried to unhash it. And even if they do manage to unhash it, they'll be unhashing and they'll find lots of characters that are not really part of your password. So this is even a more secure, very, very secure techniques at very, very little cost. They take hash functions are extremely fast, very small, and they are one-way functions. Password and practices, or bad practices. So what are the bad things that we do with our passwords? We create a password based on spouses or personal information. Don't avoid that. Don't ever have in your password your phone number or your date of birth or anything, maybe your job or something that's personal to you. Because those who want to attack you, they'll have that personal information and they'll use it. And they are good at manipulating it, and they could actually come up with that word. So there are really bad words that are based on personal information, either yours or your spouse or your pet or whatever. If you have it and if it's available, it's personal information, and it's not really a great practice. Using simple patterns instead, use random words. So don't use simple patterns like, for example, even the keyboard. Some people, they just look at the keyboard and they look at the characters, like K-W-E-R-T, and that's because they're just on the same line, easy to write it. That's very bad as well, because it follows a pattern, and all patterns that everybody in the world has tried, they have it, and they can compare your password to it and very easily worked out. Short passwords are bad. Don't ever use a short word. It doesn't matter, even, whatever, even if the system is not safe, try to get used to using longer passwords. And do not use words that can be found in a dictionary. So always avoid dictionary passwords. Now, that's the introduction. So now, there's a fatigue. There's something called password fatigue. And it's causing headache to millions and billions of people. Having to have more than 10 passwords, having to remember them is stressful. But one way to do it, well, what's the solution? Some say, let's get rid of passwords. Can we work without them? Maybe we can. They say we can do biometrics authentication. Like, why not use the fingerprint instead of a password that cannot be maybe duplicated, or the color of the eye, or whatever. But it's not always possible. And making a password, the other technique is, the opposite is to actually, continue using it, but make it easy, make it practical. Having 10 or 20 passwords to remember is not an easy task for anybody. Doesn't matter how brainy you are, how much memory you can have. It's difficult to remember. So right now we have two opposite sides. We have the IT administrators in any organization. They are the people that try to keep that organization safe. And how do they do it? The problem is, in any system, the weakest problem, it makes or maybe the strongest, or how strong a system is, depends on the weakest link. If you have a chain with one weak link, that chain is going to break. And the same with security system. You have 10,000 people working in an organization. One of them is not great. They're going to be losing, they're going to be giving out passwords, or, being a victim to some attack. So those system administrators, normally in most organizations, they advise, they teach, they maybe educate the staff members that are there. But education alone sometimes does not work, because you cannot educate people and be certain that they'll do the work. If you say, you must use 10 characters password, there are those who will not do it. Or use numbers and characters and combination of those. So in most organizations, the IT department actually enforces this. They say, okay, you need to have a password, but if you give a password, they say, sorry, it has to be more than 10 characters. And if you give it without numbers, say it has to contain numbers and characters. So introduce this, if you are a programmer, into bigger organizations, that okay, education is good to educate the staff, but also use the rules, that use the power of the computer to force them to use safe passwords. That's one end. The other one is the sophistication of the password cracking methods. So on the other extreme, there are those who want to attack a company information or access emails or whatever, and they are becoming so sophisticated, so good at actually predicting the passwords and cracking the passwords. So this research started looking at the process, the stage of actually when you make your own password. That's the moment when making the password. How do people make password? Is there a style? So a password itself they found that it's an extension of the person. Every person here has some experience, have some habits, some whatever it is, and that makes that person create a certain password. Well, someone else, maybe somebody into sports, for example, into football, you might be going for Maradona, maybe, for example, because he knows all the players. Someone else probably never knows who Maradona is, but if you're into something else, then you might go for different type. So yes, the individual himself or herself will have an influence on the creation of that password. The connection between the password and the creator can be a new technique into looking at users' habits for password checking. So if we can look at people's habits, people's interests, people's qualifications, people's background, we might be able to find some relationship between the passwords they use and the ones that are created by them. So recent research gave a hint, yes, there is an influence that context of a person or a profile of a person or the style of a person can have on a user during his or her password selection has great influence. So that's really the point of this research that my colleague here went through, is the effect of your style on the password you create. You're just one of billions, but putting it and looking at it from that perspective, that's what they looked at. It is established that there is a strong link between context, that's your kind of profile, and the password you create. In general, not you in person, but in general. So what's meant by context in this particular topic? What do we mean by there is a relationship between the context of a person and the password they create? First thing is the age. They look at the age of the person. Teenagers will have completely different passwords to retired people or people in mid-age. So the age actually has an influence on what passwords usually you'd select. Profession. And by the way, each one of those points, there's a research that supports it and been studied and verified it. The profession, they actually went to universities and they did check on different faculties. And they found the computer science people are the ones who make the most complicated words. And the business people make the easiest of the words. And if you want to look at the rest of the professions, you can look at the thesis that was published there. The other one is ethnicity. What country, what group, not country, what race are you from? They found that Chinese, for example, seem to be interested in numbers. Most of they have a high percentage of passwords that are made up of numbers. They are into dates. They write a lot of dates and a lot of phone numbers. So they started forming some kind of relationship between the person and the passwords that are created. So other factors is how